السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الذي لا إله سواه والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. The heart of the law, or the heart of Sharia, we emphasized the principle that behind the letter of the law there is a spirit of the law, that the letter of the law without its spirit, without its heart, without the aim and the objective of it is, of course, aimless. It is not wisdom, and divine wisdom is beyond. We have also learned that in the context of that spirit, Islamic law, the heart of Islamic law, intends to preserve and promote those 5 universals, namely faith, life, reason, honor, and property. That in the context of promulgating laws by any legislative Islamic body, of fatwa by any scholar, must not violate those principles. If it did, then it would not be quoted to you. I recall a word from a famous Muslim jurist when he said what means if any issue is taken from justice to injustice, from wisdom to purposelessness, from rahmah, merciful love and compassion, to the opposite of it, then that matter, that issue, that solution to a problem, so through interpretations even of scholars. We must at this point also recognize that what is very essential in this as well is Islamic law intends to ward off harm and to draw in that which is beneficial to the human being in preserving and promoting those 5 universals. Another concept which is very fundamental as a consequence of that is the distinction in Islamic Sharia between that are purely devotional, that are purely religious, in the secular sense of using the word religious. For instance, Salah, the 5 daily prayers, those are ibadat shown to us, given to us by the Divine Himself, and they are for our very well-being spiritually at our heart, and they have many, many benefits at the worldly level as well. The ibadat do not change, for they have to do with the spirit, with the soul, with the heart. The spirit and the soul and the heart are they are not subject to change. Things that are subject to time are subject to change in our philosophy of life. So when it comes to mu'amalat, in contradistinction to ibadat, those mu'amalat are different from those ibadat, and thus are not timeless, but they are time-bound, such as the way we transact and we trade with each other, such as are matters of human interactions. Those are time-bound, and time-bound entities are subject to change. And that change must not violate the constants, the universals, the aim of the law, the preservation and promotion of those 5 universals that we have been learning about repeatedly in this brief expose of the spirit of the Islamic law. So we must realize that in Islamic law, worldly matters and the law pertaining to spiritual and religious matters. whereas the law pertaining to spiritual and religious matters does not change. The law pertaining to mundane and worldly matters may change in the context of preserving faith, life, reason, honor, progeny, family, dignity, and property. And thus, there is another essential concept in this heart of the law of Islam, the concept of ta'leel, or the concept of ratiocination. The legal reason behind a verdict. There is a legal reason behind every verdict in general pertaining to mundane and worldly issues and matters. The great scholarship of Islamic law finds its greatest challenge right there, to discover that illah, to discover that ratio, to discover that underlying reasonable behind legislating a piece of law, behind giving us a rule or a verdict. Sometimes that illah, that ratio, that reason is given textually, but at other times it is the hard work, the scholarly hard work of the best of the minds of Islamic law to derive that. And if that changes, then the application of the law changes. That ta'leel is related to a hikmah. Wisdom in Islamic law, as most scholars would say, is the removal of impediment and hardship from the lives of human beings. Hardships that are obstacles in their pursuit of freedom and happiness in this world and in their pursuit of happiness in the world of the hereafter. Hikmah is an essential component of Islamic law. Some scholars have even said that a verdict of law may be connected directly to its hikmah, not only directly related to its illah. The emphasis of this concept, the emphasis of an existence of a wisdom, a practical wisdom, mental in the understanding of the heart of the law. We take a short break and we resume thereafter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back to the heart of the law. As I was of the spirit of the law, the spirit and the soul and the heart of Islamic law, I entered into the realm and concept of illah, or the legal ratio, the legal reason behind promulgating a piece of law, behind a ruling, whether it be in the Quran or in the Sunnah of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, or perhaps even in promulgating laws by discovering a law by a scholar, promulgating a law by a legislative body. That concept of illah that are mundane to the matters that are of this world, not to the matters that are spiritual and timeless. The concept of illah is very rich, but very difficult. It is the greatest of the great scholars that would have the ability to discover that legal reason behind the verdict, especially when it is not textual. Ignoring that, however, ignoring this legal to Islam, doing a disservice to the Muslims, nay, to humanity. Now also this concept of illah must not be taken by those who are not well and greatly initiated in this realm because it may lead to dangerous conclusions. It may lead to the making the law inoperative. It is a realm in which certain internal drives inside of us may influence somehow, or maybe even greatly, those. Allah Ta'ala had said that we have always to continue to show reverence to the law of the divine, to the commands and the prohibitions. تعظيم الأمر والنهي. And one of those essential ways of showing reverence to the law is the following: أن لا يعارض بترخص جاف، وألا يعرض لتشديد غال، وألا يحمل على علة توهن الانقياد. Well-phrased concept by that great scholar, rahimahullah ta'ala. He said, of the necessary elements to show reverence to the law, divine law, is first not to apply concessions in the law in a dry way, in a crude and dry way. For instance, as we mentioned earlier, divine law in its wisdom allowed for us concessions pertaining to the application of the law under certain special circumstances, especially when those circumstances would lead to harm. Property, for instance. But then we must not abuse the concession. For instance, if one is not really sick, if one feels just a little bit tired, and then takes that as a reason for, let's say, not fasting one day of the month of Ramadan, which in essence would be due to his or her our own laziness rather than a dire need for a concession. An example that is given would be taking the concession of combining two salawat when we travel, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam combined his salawat under certain circumstances, not always when he traveled. And thus he argues, rahimahullah ta'ala, that taking that concession of combining salah, Dhuhr and Asr together, Maghrib and Isha together, under all circumstances when we travel, is in a subject the law to excessive strictness. تشدد أو تشديد غال. We subject the application of the law to excessive strictness that the law itself does not require. And then we put ourselves, or we put others rather, in unnecessary difficulty and unease and hardship to the law. One should not be only engaged, and perhaps even too engaged, in applying the letter of the law, because that might lead to a situation of excessive strictness, of course, nor to go to the other extreme of abusing the concession itself, neither extreme right nor extreme left. And the third element that is an indication of showing reverence, a reasoning that would diminish from the show of reverence to the law. In other words, if the scholar is trying to understand this verdict of the law in matters of human interactions, in family law, social law, political law, international law, and then would want to discover the reason behind the law, then one of the beautiful conditions arduous work of, first of all, a list of possibilities, and then from that list of possibilities, some will be removed and only one will remain, that which will be selected by the scholar on the basis of certain legal principles and on the basis of the preservation of the five universals must not be one that will lead to people show lack of reverence to the law. One example that is given, which is perhaps a little bit excessive, is that some group who did not represent any sort of a large group or a majority of people in some centuries ago, who would understand the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, which means do serve your Lord, do worship your Lord until you attain yaqeen. And they say here yaqeen means certain. Worship God, to be devout to God until we have yaqeen, and they understand the yaqeen here as certainty. Once a person reaches spiritual and intellectual certainty, then he or she may stop worshipping God. This is impossible. This is impossible. And this is an example of irreverence to the law by choosing reverence to the law. Yaqeen means here death and not certainty, and thus worship your Lord until death. Be devout to your Lord until death. That concept is also very important in the heart of the law. It makes Islamic law beautiful. It has always been this beautiful. Today, nowadays, as we live times of so much ignorance about the world and about each other and about Islam itself amongst Muslims and amongst non-Muslims, we oft of Islamic law. And many people, many Muslims who seem to care for Islam and for Islamic law, not knowing these facts, which I tried only to summarize briefly in these 2 episodes I'm spending with you, when they do not have knowledge of that, those amongst us who do not have knowledge of that, the result is that we might cause more harm than the benefit that we intend. Ignorance of something, of a lot of things, is not bliss. Little knowledge, as it is said, is dangerous knowledge. Sometimes we harm ourselves in ways we think we are doing benefit to ourselves. Well, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, for instance, rahimahullah ta'ala, in some of his works, emphasizes this fact that there are Muslims, even Muslim scholars and Muslim students of law and of Islam, who would cause more harm to Islam, intending to do benefit. There are spoke about in the context of the heart of the law. Time will not permit us to cover many of those. But perhaps the concept of qat'iyat and dhanniyat is also worth at least to mention. The concept of definitiveness and the concept of probability in Islamic law that are considered by Islamic scholars as definitive, conclusive. And there are matters that are considered probabilistic. Yes, in law, we only need that which is probabilistic to apply. Know that we only need the preponderance of the evidence to make a case. And that's the concept of a proof that is dhanni, probabilistic. In the concept of criminal law, we need evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And that is the concept similar to the concept of qat'iyat in Islamic law. But the distinction between the two, correct as mine or more correct than mine. Concept of wara' in fiqh, concept of, if you will, religious consideration or religious abstinence, that Islamic law is not just a law, is not a worldly law only, not a secular law. It's a law in which the person responsible in front of God in this world and on the day of judgment. Al-wara'u fil fiqh, that one is to be very careful and always aware of this reality. And thus, great scholars would be usually very adamant to give an opinion in the law, especially in the absence of textual evidence, out of fear that they may fall not sanctioned. Scholars have said, this matter, إن هذا الأمر دين فانظروا عمن تأخذوا دينكم. This matter of ours, this matter of law, is not only law, it's faith, it's religion. Thus be careful, beware from whom you take your religion, you take your faith, you take your law. This is not a law in which, if we make mistakes, held accountable perhaps most of the time in this world, as long as we belong to a legislative body. In Islamic law, whether we belong to a legislative body or we do not, we are held accountable for how we understand the law, how much effort have we made to understand the law and interpret the law. Did we interpret the law of illusion or of ulterior motives, or were we truthful and sincere? The heart of the law beats, and it must beat. And we cannot understand the law without its heart. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.